Yay! All right, so today I think you're going to have a little bit of fun because everything we were doing, we've done before. We're just going to do it in whatever combination you want to. Um, and I'm getting ready for an art show which is going on Saturday. And so, as you're drawing today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about, what the process is for getting an art show together and some of the things that have happened and some of the behind the scenes of what's going on. I can't show you any of the pictures that are going to be in the show, except that one right there, the beans that are hanging up. That's a painting that has been out there before, and I'm going to just bring it along for the show to show it. But it's kind of an interesting aspect of the art world is how shows kind of go together. But in the meantime, let's get on to drawing. Class number 15. Oh my goodness, class 15. Oh my goodness, I can't believe we only have 4 more left. This is just so much fun. So we're continuing on the theme of home. And this week we're going to be drawing the key. So that's not all that secret of a. And so here's the image we're working with today. So on the concept of home, I thought it'd be kind of fun to, an image like this, a key to the home, a home of the past, items maybe that have personal meaning. Now, this is a stock photo. This isn't, something I own, but I'm sure that you have around your house, old photo albums, old keys, that kind of thing. I don't know what it is about the old keys. They do tend to accumulate, but you can make a rather simple, interesting combination of shapes, basically, with something like this. And so there's a little bit of a mystery to a scene like this. What door is this a key to? Why has it been kept? What's in the notebook? What's the old piece of paper underneath about? Is that a photograph that's upside down? What's going on? So I think it's fun to do a drawing where everything isn't laid out exactly. I mean, yes, there are the objects and the shape, there are textures and that kind of thing, but there's also a little bit to wonder about. And I certainly wonder about what's in that notebook. So when you're actually, deciding you've done a finished drawing and you want to name it, you want to call it something, naming an artwork to help tell its story is really helpful. So if I called it the Old Guest House, then you might think that maybe that is a guest book register or something like that, that notebook. If I say it's from Emily's study, then we wonder who's Emily. Were these objects that belonged to Emily? All that is left. Does that mean these were items that were rescued, from a fire, or the only things that were handed down by somebody? Never forgotten is another one. Perhaps this is a memento from somebody or something. So often the name of an artwork can really help get your intention across, beyond just somebody admiring, your technical skill and the layout, that sort of thing. So when we want to talk about this in terms of how we're going to draw it, the usual question, how to interpret this scene? What are we drawing here? So we're drawing a key, an old notebook, paper. Yeah, I think this paper is useful because if it wasn't for that sort of differentiating between the key and the notebook and the background, it might all kind of blend together. So that piece of paper from a dynamic composition point of view is useful. And now how are we going to draw it? So during the course of this summer, we've tried using, different, approaches. The beveled pencil lead, which allowed us to make big washes. The more academic drawing, where we had a very fine point to the pencil, and we were sort of making little circles or little hatches to create, very smooth shading. We've messed around with charcoal. We've, used the eraser quite a bit. Just regular pencils, that you would normally have, and so. In a drawing like this, it's a great opportunity to use a number of techniques. You can use line work, the academic approach for the key, for example. Maybe you want to do that very, very, consistent type of, rotation of your pencil tip to get an even sort of, look to it. Perhaps you want to use that look to kind of give it a bit of a rusty feel. Maybe you'd like to use the beveled tip for the pages to sort of show very quickly how the pages work. Maybe also for the cover, because you can get a nice wash in just one value. Blending in charcoal can be used for the background because that really just is there to set off this particular image. And the regular pencil tip or a finer pencil tip for the string where you want to kind of get that feeling of the rolled jute or whatever this is. So for this class today, you can use any combination you'd like. I'm going to lead you through what I did, but as you're drawing, as long as you're sort of getting to the same point, which tools you choose to do that are entirely up to you. So I would like you to start, and I didn't do one myself because I'm a bad artist, but I'd like you to do a little notan just to get familiar with the scene. I am rather familiar with this right now, but it would be really useful for you to just do either a tiny little sketch or a tiny little notan. All you're doing is you're squinting at the scene, excuse me, just to remove the idea of color. And you're just looking for the dark and the light, making kind of drawing these objects out and trying to figure out how this is going to work. Okay, so when you're actually drawing a scene like this in more detail, one of the things that you will do, which you may not include in your notan, because notans are usually very small, 1 by 2 inches or so, just trying to get the dark and light areas. But it is useful when you're going through this process to note that string, the tangle of string that comes up from the top of the notebook, there's some dark, but there's also some light areas, and those need to stay light against that kind of mid-tone background, mid-value background. And so whether you include that idea in your notan or not, it's something you're definitely going to want to keep in mind while you're actually drawing. So for this notan, however, just abbreviate the shapes. You don't have to draw any of this stuff in any kind of detail. But the stuff to notice is the fact that there's dark background underneath the paper. There's a dark shape under the key, and there's sort of a continuation of dark and shadow patterns through the string that sort of tie together nicely. So there's kind of a and underneath the notebook, there's sort of the blending of the pages on that side. So this is a really strong composition in terms of light and dark. From a drawing point of view, there will be some places that are a little bit, difficult to deal with in terms of like how do we do a light value such as we need for the top of the notebook, and exactly how do we do that string. But from a notan point of view, all you're looking for are the shapes of light and dark. So I'll give you just a second to finish this up. I want to make sure we have a lot of time for drawing today. Okay, so we're going to move on. All right, now we're getting ready to do the actual drawing. So, it's kind of like the way we went about hands. We've got all this information in front of us, but just like the fingers, when we looked at, the picture of the hands holding the cup, and I drew those big kind of envelopes around the overall shape of the hands. It's sort of like this for the key and the string. The string is one kind of big shape. If we try to get that information about individual bits of string out of our heads, and instead look at the large kind of triangular shape that it makes. Likewise, the key, that's a big shape. There is a long rectangle that makes up the major part of the key. There's a small rectangle coming towards us. And then, and this is probably going to be the most difficult thing to draw, there is the oval at the base of the key. So if you think about the perspective classes that we had before, where we were talking about, you take a circle, and as you tilt it over and lay it on your side, it becomes more oval. Well, when you have an oval already and you have it sort of tipped in space like this, it can be helpful to figure out where the midsection is. Where is the middle going in one direction and where's the middle going in the other direction? And that information will help you draw the shape, because we have a lot of perspective lines here. And in order to carry the design off, the drawing off, accuracy in terms of where the edges of these pieces of paper are, the notebook, the angle of the key, will be so useful in making the thing look like it's not too tipped up towards us or not too flat going away from us. So The other thing is to consider in advance where to use directional line to describe the form. There are lots of places where it could be potentially useful, such as along the shank of the key, along the pages on the side of the book, to just have directional lines, actual outlines working here. So we're going to be pulling in at various places how to actually just include regular line work. The idea being that we don't go heavy at the beginning on line work. We start off really subtle and then use line work as it's needed to help define the form as we go along. All right, so the very first step will be to use a light pencil, such as an F, an H, or an HB, and carefully sketch the main angles of the scene. And I'm going to just show this to you kind of larger so you can see what I'm doing. So what happened as I was drawing this, I kept my lines pretty light. They're actually in real life lighter than this. And as I kind of figured out where my angles were going to be, they don't have to be like photographic to what we're seeing right here, but they do have to work, work in space in some way. So I ended up moving a few things around, changing the proportions just a little bit. My book isn't exactly the same, length as that one. My key isn't precisely the same shape, but the idea is there. And so as you're working out, you might go, okay, where do I even start? I'm going to start with the key, but I would suggest starting with the angles of the paper underneath and the notebook, and starting with those two, trying to get those two relative to each other. I found I had to sort of move my lines around a couple of times to kind of make that proportion work. And the way that I knew it was working was where did objects intersect? So let me get back to where you can see the image larger. So for example, I started off drawing, the notebook and the corner of the paper on the left. And then I said, okay, I know where my angle should go across. How do I know, how big to make that upper corner of the white paper? And so I said, it seems to intersect on the side of my notebook a little bit further than halfway. And so I kept looking at not just the angles, but where is the intersection of one object to another? As the key lays across the top of both the paper and the notebook, how much of the paper underneath is showing above the top level of the key. So you don't have to be photographic. You don't have to be, you're not trying to be a camera. You're not, there's no extra prize you get for super accuracy. But what you are trying to get is a sense of this particular scene. And it's good to know how to be accurate for those times when you do want to be accurate. You may decide that not everything in this particular scene is important to you, that you actually, you want to change your key considerably, you want to change the string considerably, and that kind of thing. But the idea is that you're going to create something that has a degree of, bearing on what we're looking at, and also actually works in real life. Now, one thing I am going to go back to the big picture for 1 second while you're drawing. I'll just show you, look what I did with the string. So the string has to be logical. If you're going to have string like that, it has to, basically it has to connect up in a way that makes sense. And this goes also for vines, for foliage of all kinds, for tree branches. They can't just appear and disappear with no start or stop. There has to be some logic, even if you're drawing something in a way that it's actually all going to sort of meld together and then reform later. Perhaps the branches hidden behind some leaves or something like that. It still has to work logically. Our brains are expecting continuity. So even if the line itself isn't all hooked up and drawn together, even if it disappears part way, we're still expecting that there's going to be, where that line is going to reform and reconnect. So what I tend to do if I'm drawing something like this, even if I think it's going to, some of it will end up fusing together, but I just want to get the layout, I make sure that I draw the whole thing, both sides, like outlines, but, in just really lightly, and make sure that up and down and back and forth actually works. I don't care if I draw over lines I already have, because all of that will be erased or, drawn over later on. But I just want to make sure that what I end up with is going to look somewhat logical. Now, if I can't actually see what's going on, I just draw what I can see going on. I don't try to insert extra information. There's a bunch of stuff going on in those knots on the right-hand side that you really can't tell exactly what's happening. It doesn't matter, as long as the shapes you make are of interest to you and you think that, it kind of tells the story. The story is not about the string. The story is about, the key, the notebook, the paper, what is this scene about? It's about home, a past home, something like that. It's not about how the string works. But in order for our minds to see the whole scene and not get tied up on, what the heck's going on with the string? Why is that string not all connected, and could get completely distracted, then we want it to work somehow. Even if you're abstracting something, even if you're, drawing flowers in a vase and you're drawing them very geometric, very abstract, even if you're sort of, creating something that disappears in and out of, some other scene, there still has to be some logic there to hold it together if you want people to not get distracted, by what's happening. So I want to let you have some time to draw this on this particular stage. I think it's kind of important. It took me a while to get all my lines right and figure out what's going on. As you work your way around, you start, and I'm sure you do now after 15 classes, you're already starting to kind of prep. How am I going to do those pages? How I'm going to show this? What are we going to do with this background here? Does everything have to fit into a rectangle, or can I sort of let it drift off? And so just to let you know in advance, I sort of left the edges of mine drift off. I did some of that charcoaly gray in the background, but I didn't put it in a square. All of that kind of stuff is, a rectangle. All of that stuff is very individual, very up to you what you would like to do. So I'm going to take a sip of coffee and then I'm going to start talking about art shows. I figured this would just be something, different, that I could somewhat distract you from the difficulties of what you're drawing by talking to you about, what goes on with an art show, especially because I'm in the middle of it. I'm at that point where I haven't lost sleep yet, but the eyes are getting puffy and I'm losing my voice because I'm working late at night with fans blowing and that sort of thing. So I end up getting kind of a frog in my throat as I get towards an opening. So in the best of all possible worlds, you think to yourself, oh, a gallery is going to, put on a show of my work, and I'm just going to show up with some paintings and everything is going to be fine. And then I come to the opening and I drink wine and talk to people, and that's all there is to it. But I am not represented by a gallery. I work for myself and I work on commission, and I put on shows, because I want to put on shows, but that also puts the burden on how that goes back on me. So also in the best of all possible worlds, I would have already prepared all the paintings for the show in advance of having the idea and coming up with a venue and that sort of thing. But, I've been doing this for 12 years now, and it's never worked like that so far. In every single case, I have some work done and a lot of work not done when the seed for the show, the idea is planted. So for this particular show that I'm working on, Stina Sayer and I have done a number of these types of shows together. She likes to show artwork, and many people do in their stores or restaurants or whatever. It gives them artwork to put on the wall, or an opportunity to have an event, and they like to promote local artists. And Stina and I found that the people who liked, my portraits and the people who liked her clothing tended to be the same type of group of people. Why not get them all together to do something like this? So in this particular case, we selected 9 people who I decided I was going to paint portraits of. At other times, I've decided, okay, this theme or that theme, whether artists who are working or people I know around the island or whatever would be the subject matter. And so you've got the actual time it takes to meet the people. If you're doing portraiture, meet the people, uh, come up with the composition, paint the paintings. But the art show itself is its own, requires its own preparation. So what I tend to do, and I've learned this really somewhat from, my days in graphic design, is to work the whole preparation backwards. So before I get on to that part, I'm going to move us on to the next stage in this drawing, because you can still be drawing this and look at what happens next. Okay, so next is going to be using either graphite or charcoal and a blending stump or a rag or whatever you'd like to use to put down the background gray and the shadows cast by the key. But don't go full strength yet, because you may find that what you put down initially is dark enough once you get everything else in. So I always, when I put those initial darks down, I don't go crazy. Let me just show you rather large. So I started off, I used charcoal pencil, but I used a 2B. It was pretty hard pencil. And I just lightly sketched in lots of different directions. And then I blended and I added a little bit more dark where I wanted to. Now I happen to be working on a relatively hard paper, and that was a relatively hard charcoal pencil. And so I used a rag. I just found a rag was easier to control. Sometimes a blending stump, especially if it already has charcoal on, can get a little dark. So let me just reduce that down so you guys sort of know where you're getting to for the next stage, and I'll continue talking about art shows. So working backwards, what does that mean? Well, that means you have to decide how the paintings are going to hang. Are they going to, or the drawings or whatever you're doing, are they going to all be framed? If they're not, which many of mine aren't, how are you going to make that happen? So I'm working on panels now. I had to devise a way to attach a type of hanger to the back to be able to hang all of these paintings in Stina's place. I also had to go and check out the venue and make sure the paintings were going to fit. I have one very large painting that I would love to have in this show, but I know from past experience that it's going to be too big, and there isn't one large wall space in her store. Whereas if you were in a gallery or something, you could put that in. So you have to go and check out all of that information first. And in some cases, you then actually do the artwork and the sizes of the artwork based on the venue that you're going to be showing in, if you possibly can. Likewise, I tend to look at sort of the, what is this space like? What are people who come here? What are they going to enjoy? What's going to be fun? Because I think that openings and little shows like this are, sometimes art is very serious, but a lot of times it can be fun. And I think portraiture has a little bit of a reputation of being super stuffy, super stuffy and traditional. And so, this show that I'm putting on this weekend is going to, try to break that a little bit. And it will also include a little kind of drawing aspect into the paintings. I can't wait to show them to you. I'll definitely show you next week, what I did, what I was talking about. So the other types of things that you end up considering is, what's the lighting like? I put on a show a few years ago at the Grange Hall in West Tisbury, and it's a wonderful open space. It was perfect. I had dividers and this, that, and the other, and it's dark, super, super dark in there. So I ended up having to buy a lot of directional lighting to make sure that some of the paintings had some light on them. So that kind of stuff can really throw you for a loop at the last minute. You have to sort of prep for all of that, make sure that you have time to order, receive items, test them out, make sure it's going to work. So you're doing all that at the same time that you're trying to paint, be in the zone and paint, which it can be a little bit of a little difficult. And then you also have to think about how are you going to transport your paintings. Now, for a lot of people, if you're working small, you can just stack them in the back of your car and you can go to the scene and you can, set everything up. It's not a big deal. But when Bill and I were living out on Nashawina Island, and that's where I, started portrait painting, going to a show meant taking all the paintings in a lobster boat. Now you're crashing through the waves, from Nashawina Island. Sometimes it can be stormy. The weather is not always calm when you're coming across to Vineyard Haven. There are certain areas where currents meet, or you could be running against the tide, and it can really be a problem. And so Bill ended up building for each painting a wooden box that I ended up at this point. This time I was working on paintings that had stretcher bars, on them, and so I was able to put like little hooks on the back, and we would tie the painting into the box through holes on the back of the box, so that the paintings would not shift within these boxes, and we could stack a bunch of them with the idea if we hit a really bad wave and all of the boxes went flying, that the paintings would still be okay. And so that is how both Stina Sayers and Nat Benjamin's paintings, amongst many others, came over to the island for their unveilings. So that kind of stuff adds adds a level of uncertainty and drama. We haven't even got to the opening. You're not worrying yet about the clothes and the wine and cheese or anything like that. You're just trying to deal with the logistics of how is it going to go together. All right, let me check the time and see if we can move on to the next stage. Oh no, we'll just stay here for a little bit longer. So to get back to your drawing for a second, at this point, what should be happening is, without having drawn everything in super tidy detail, the sense of the scene and the layout should be pretty clean. At this point, if you have a problem with perspective or something not going quite right, this is the time to mess with it. You don't have to go crazy. As I was drawing, I knew that there were little things about, I won't even tell you. There were little things that weren't exactly like on the money, but I was like, does that matter to the overall, like, is the story still going to be told if I just continue like this and don't backtrack? Because I knew that, I was putting myself under the same kind of time constraints that I'm putting you under. So, if it's small stuff, don't sweat it. I also wasn't worrying a ton about neatening up all the edges, because a lot of that happens when you get to the darker, the darker stages. Some of those lines that you have that are kind of light, but maybe not in the right place, that you can even them up, with the stuff that comes on a little bit darker. There's the handy eraser, let's not forget the handy eraser. So that's another part of it. Okay, I am going to move us on now to the next stage. Okay, so this next step is to start working anywhere you want, with any technique you want. I decided to start with the pages of the notebook, get some definition to the string, and move on to the key, paying attention to relative values. So I'm just going to show you a little bit larger oops, I don't think I did show you larger. Okay, never mind. I'll do that later. So what I ended up doing, I'll just tell you what I did, was the first thing I did was I grabbed like a 4B or a 6B beveled ended pencil, and I'm like, okay, I don't have a lot of time here, and I started putting in the darker areas that I saw all over the place. Now this is kind of the same way that I work in paint. I'll start off with the darks just to kind of define things and start to give it a bit of shape. In this case, I used I think it was a 6B beveled ended pencil to start getting in large areas of darks. It's not super accurate, because with the beveled tip, you can't get but so much accuracy to some of those lines. Although I did do a little bit of that stuff that I hope you guys have been trying also, where you're running along with the beveled end. It's a nice thick line, and then you tilt it up a little bit on the leading edge, and you get that finer line. Now it'll go back down to being, a nice beveled edge once you do the next beveled bit, because pencil lead wears down, so you're wearing it back to where you want to be for a bevel. But what it allows you to do is kind of like pen and ink, to make these pretty expressive lines all in one stroke. And I found that really useful, and I kind of played around with it because I don't have to be but so accurate on the side of the notebook, because all I needed to do was get kind of rough page edges in. Then what I said, okay, that worked out pretty well. I'm going to use that same idea and throw the darks in, under the key, start to define some of the dark areas on the string. at that point, I was like, okay, I've got to figure out what happens with this notebook cover, because it needs to be, when I talk about relative values, it needs to be darker than the white paper underneath, but lighter than the charcoal in the back. So what I did was I got I think it was a 2H beveled pencil, and I kind of roughly, you know how we've been using those beveled leads to do these washes that are very smooth, but you can also be a little clunky with it on purpose. And I decided I wanted to get a little bit of this texture feeling in, and also just kind of add some, some color basically to the whole burlappy end. So I actually went in one direction. You'll be able to see this a little more closely on one of the larger pictures I'll show you in a minute. But I went one direction, following the perspective in one direction, and then I went back the other, other direction to kind of give a burlappy sort of a checker feel to it. I didn't care if it was a little bit on the rough side, because with the stains and the aging that you see here, that's actually better than doing something really consistent. And then I took, I think it was it was an HB beveled pencil. And I just started kind of building up a little bit of that feeling of the turning around string, the darker edge that's under the bottom, making some, darker notes where the pieces of string crossed over each other. And just kind of, I'm not getting into the tiny details yet. I know there are things that still need to be cleaned up, but this is not that point. This is the point where, if you were painting, you would be just getting paint down. In a drawing, that's basically what you're doing. You're just kind of getting color down everywhere, trying to assess the relative values, what's going to need to be darker, what's going to be a little bit problematic. So there are a couple of places that are problematic. And one is that, we didn't make our background super dark. Therefore, even with a 2H pencil, the cover of this little book is about the same value. I'm not going to worry about that right now and start messing with that. The key is almost the same value. It's right there in that same range. So at this point, I still hadn't quite decided exactly what to do with that. But I was more concerned about, okay, just as I've mentioned before, when you wonder, like, what do I do first? Do what you see is most sensible and obvious first. I'm like, okay, I saw the pages and I saw the shadow underneath the key to be, or, on the side of the key. That's the most obvious to me. And then, okay, I can do some of these darks and stuff and the twisty bit that I see about the string. I can handle that. And while I was working on that, that's when I said, oh, you know what, I can do a graphite wash for the cover too. So stuff will occur to you as you go. Don't feel like I've got to have this planned out in detail. Sometimes you'll do stuff and you're not quite sure what's going to happen. When I used the charcoal and I did the hatching back and forth to make the gray in the background, I actually have not done that before. So, nothing like getting ready for a class where I've got to tell you something useful and just diving in. But because I've worked using that, doing that before, similarly on other subjects, I didn't think it would go too badly. And backgrounds are a great place to experiment, because as long as the values are right, it doesn't really matter about the detail. And what I tend to do in both drawing and painting is get the darkest darks in at the end. So much easier to regulate it based upon how the entire drawing looks, at that point, rather than, going super dark at the beginning and then not being able to back it out because I made everything too dark. Let's just see how many more minutes I'm going to give you at this particular stage. Oh, we're good. Okay. So to get back to, the art show thing, it's always amazing to me, what I've had to do behind the scenes to pull off some of these shows. For example, when I was doing the unveiling of Stina and Nat's paintings, we did have to come over, by boat. I, pull in over at Gannon and Benjamin, right next to the workshop gallery, which is where we were doing the art show. In order to do this, we had to leave at the crack of dawn. That meant cows had to be fed, chickens had to be, taken care of, cat had to be taken care of, et cetera, et cetera. the boat fueled up and everything before dawn in order for us to get over. As it was, on this particular venture, I actually came over the day before just to make sure everything could be set up properly, and ended up sleeping on the floor in a friend's studio just because it was available and I just needed a place to crash. So, it's always funny to me. I look back on some of these pictures of these unveilings and these events and just sort of remember what went on behind the scenes. I think that it whatever it took to get me to the event or to the opening or to the unveiling or whatever it has, it's always been worth it. The work has been worth it in the end. You just sort of keep the idea in mind of what you're trying to get done, and keep the focus going. In the last week, like I'm in right now for this particular show, every hour makes a difference. Every hour has to be spent on the end goal. Knock on wood, things are going really well this time because I've learned a lot of lessons, but you never know. Okay, I'm going to move us on to the next stage here. So at this point, do you need to do any erasing? You're continuing to explore and refine and adding in small details, deciding, hey, do you want to add in the rust on the key and the shadows cast by the string? Hopefully I've got a larger picture here. Yeah, so at this point, I'm still not down to the final details, but I am starting to work the whole picture around, trying to see what's going on. Okay, I'll make that small again so you guys can keep working. So one of the reasons I enjoy doing these unveilings and the shows like this is I think it's really fun for people. A lot of, once again, art can be really stuffy. It can be very serious. Often art openings and such can be kind of routine. They're fun to go to and meet people and see new art. But I think what's fun about the unveilings is that, usually when I do them, if they're me deciding to paint paintings and unveil them, I don't let the people see what the paintings look like until the actual unveiling. So they have to be there to actually, experience that. And of course, people want to be there to see that happen, with all of us hoping that it works out. So there's a little bit of a nerve-wracking moment every time somebody sees their painting, because I'm not exactly sure how they're going to react. But I think that makes it more, more fun, more festive, more like an event. It's really enjoyable. I mean, I like putting on the other kind of show as well, where it's just, artwork of some particular theme and people get to, take the time and have a look at it. I've done a number of shows with the Vineyard Haven Public Library. They do something called Art in the Stacks. Downstairs, they have this one wall with a rotation of artists who hang their work up there. And that's really fun because people, get to spend as much time as they want looking at the work, no pressure whatsoever, no rush of time. And for me though, at the openings, they're fun because, there's all of this stuff going on. My hardest, the thing that's most difficult for me at an opening is trying to circulate and talk to all the people I want to talk to, because I've usually spent months by myself in the studio, and now, wow, people to talk to, and there's so much catching up to do. It's very difficult to make sure that I'm talking to all the people that I want to talk to. So that'll be the challenge this week. All right, let's see how much time we have left here. Okay, we're doing pretty well. So I'm going to give you about 4 more minutes on this particular stage. But I wanted to talk about this business about doing shows because, if as you go along in your own art career, you may get to the point where you would like to, to put on a show or participate in a show, all of that sort of thing. So whether you're thinking about, how are the labels going to work? In this particular case, is the store owner going to let me attach labels to the wall, or do I have to attach them to the back of a painting? All kinds of small things. How am I going to hang them that doesn't make holes in the wall, or the smallest holes possible? I in this case, I'll probably come back afterwards and do a tiny little bit of caulking to fill up all the holes to make sure that the walls still look good. All of that sort of thing. Deciding on, are you selling the work or are you just showing it? In this particular case, for this show, I'm just showing it. But, how would you handle sales if it was just you putting on the show yourself? How would that go? There are lots and lots of things to think through like that. And lots of other artists who've done this sort of who've put on shows and done that kind of thing, who can give you input on, what worked for them and what didn't. But I hope as you go along and continue to draw, that whether it's a local community art show or the All Island Art Show or anything like that, it's fun to get a work to the point where you feel like, hey, I really like this. And I actually don't care if anybody else likes it. I'm going to frame it and I'm going to put it in this show and just sort of, and that way you've done it. It's kind of like the business of entering competitions. I often will enter a competition, not because I really think that, okay, I'm going to win this, because some of these competitions have literally thousands of entrants. So, how is one work going to rise above another? It's very subjective. But the feeling of accomplishment that you've got a work done to the point where you do feel proud enough of it to enter, I think that's really a good milestone. And it's just something interesting to think about. All right, let's move on to the next stage here. So step 5 is the final assessment. In this particular step, all you're really doing is you're bringing everything to a close. It doesn't really matter which pencil you're using, which lead or whatever. It's all about what is the goal you're trying to achieve. For me at this point, I wanted to clean up a lot of edges. So I wanted to know, does the drawing read clearly? Like, can you tell it's a key and some string on a book on a piece of paper? And I was like, okay, I do think it does. So this is a little bit larger. What I did was I ran around my edges. I sort of cleaned up the edges of that white paper, cleaned up the edge of the notebook by putting a teeny little outline around the edge that sort of, amplified the fact that it was a little bit, wonky around the edges. I added, which is hard to see right here, but I added some hatching in, going in different directions, some directional lines on the key to sort of show the roundness or flatness in different places, and a little bit, not everywhere, but a little of the twisty stuff that was going on the string. It's not an exhaustive look at this particular composition, because of our time limit. But, I was like, okay, that brought it to an edge and to an end. What I did where I felt that I needed a little bit darker value behind objects in order to sort of, pop them out a little bit. I didn't go back and make the entire background darker. I just selected little places like the place on the right-hand side where you can sort of see the intersection of the notebook and the paper, made that a little bit darker. I went in with a blending stump in between all the stuff on the string, just made that a little bit darker, added a teeny bit of darkness around the top, I guess it's the upper left-hand corner of the notebook, and likewise sort of pumped up the darkness underneath the key. Just little stuff. You don't want to get too carried away. If I had made the background too dark, then all of a sudden it would have given an odd, the dark of the background would have started to kind of come forward. So you had to be a little bit careful how you modulate that. But it's just, this is the sort of especially if you don't have bags of time and you're trying to sort of figure out how to get to the end of your drawing. This is when I always go back to like whether it's a mechanical pencil or an H or an F or an HB, nothing softer or harder than that, and just sort of pick out some details, because I know that if I haven't had time to place texture and value and, all the rest of it all over the thing, at least I can make sure my edges are clean. And if the edges are clean, that helps the entire drawing just, read a little bit more clearly. And I went back in also and added some definition to the pages themselves, just to kind of pump up that whole feeling that this is a little bit of a notebook. So, what I'm going to sort of suggest for you this week is that, if you have a few objects lying around, it can be absolutely anything. But I've got some ideas at the end I'll share with you about how to sort of put together a little composition that might have a little bit of mystery, just cause people to ask some questions, and then just practice drawing it, and whether you spend half an hour, a couple of hours on it, but try to draw from life if you can. We don't really have that opportunity, of course, in these classes. We're drawing from photographs, and it's a great way to do that. But I do think that drawing this stuff from life is really helpful, because when we already have a cropped photo like this, A lot of the distraction has been eliminated. If you set your stuff up on your kitchen table or dining room table or whatever to draw, your peripheral vision still sees all this other stuff. It sees the rest of the table, the stuff at the other end of the table, the chair backs, the things on the wall. It's very difficult to get down to just the objects you're trying to draw, which is why this entire business of, the no-tan and everything is really useful. When you have a cropped photograph like this, the composition has been taken care of for you. But when you have objects just sitting in front of you, you have to make those decisions yourself. It's just like going back to, and you can use a viewfinder if you want to, if it's, if you really find that is helpful to eliminate the other stuff and to come up with a composition that's pretty tight, like this one right here. But also going, hey, I now have all at my disposal a number of different approaches I can use to draw. What happens, for example, instead of just blending the background, what happens if I use that academic technique of the very, just doing the little ovals, a little bit more pressure where I want it darker, a little less pressure where I want it light, and make a really, really smooth background. How would that work? It would be very meditative, might take a little while. It would look really good though. Likewise, you could literally take a sharper, 2H pencil and actually draw very light cross hatching to emulate the burlap of that cover, and go over it a few more times in a different direction to get the shading. There are lots and lots of ways to approach everything that you draw. And the only way you'll figure out, what you like and what works is by actually doing it. All right, I'm going to move us on at this particular point. So go ahead and wrap up. Just the last couple of minutes here. You'll get, as usual, the PDF, and I'll send that around right after class. Now, the video for this class, it may take me a few days to get that online. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get that online right away. Might be after the show opens. But even if you just take time to redraw this scene, but do try to set up something of your own and draw it from life. I think at this point, after all of these series of classes, that it's now time to really practice for yourself, creating your own setups, creating compositions, and dealing with all the sort of the problems that happen with that. Okay, I'm going to move us on. All right, so this is basically what we did today. And you can see how moving from, just the outline, taking the time to get that right, as right as you want it to be for, to get you started. Dropping in a background of some sort so that you have something against which to play the other values. Now, you could just as easily just start drawing, stuff in general, and then work out your background later. Not impossible to do that. But I just thought for this particular exercise, it was useful to start with the background. Then you start pumping it up a little bit, you blend it in, you start to add some details, figure out, which combination of pencils. Do you want a little bit darker? How are those last details going to work? It's a relatively simple drawing exercise, but it's just good to know that you've got all of these various tools at your disposal. Okay, so wrapping up. Concept, of course, we're still on this home concept. And I will tell you right now, I think we're back to toned paper next week. We've got a landscape example. It's going to be very restful and fun. It's going to be using that same sort of what I call my travel sketching approach of toned paper. I just really want you to have this so second nature that you feel very comfortable going out and drawing. So we'll be using whatever combination of pencils and charcoal you want, white charcoal on toned paper, to do a scene that has a lot of distance to it, a lot of atmosphere, and continuing to work in atmosphere and that sort of thing. It'll be fun. It'll be relatively restful. The week after that will be less restful. So we're not coasting yet. I've got a few challenges for you before this whole thing wraps up, but I just wanted to let you know what I'm going to do next week. So, your personal memorabilia is a great source of material for all sorts of concepts. In this case, to tell the story of home, items around the home give some obvious and maybe not so obvious clues, and let the mystery of a scene be part of the story. So when I say that, it's what you can do is put items together that make people ask a question. For example, I said a soup can, a can opener, and a broken dish. So the question, of course, would be, what's up with the broken dish? What is that about? Another little vignette might be a model airplane, a newspaper clipping, and an old photograph. And it doesn't have to be that they tie together in some way, like the newspaper clipping doesn't have to be Charles Lindbergh, or whatever. It can actually be a little obscure and make people wonder, what is the connection? Now, it could be that there is a personal connection for you. The model airplane could have been something, a relative made. The newspaper clipping could be about that relative. The photograph could be another family member from that family or something like that. So there could be a connection that you know about. You can use the title of a drawing as the idea to sort of, sometimes I think of titles of drawing or paintings or drawings up front, and they help me sort of anchor the concept and keep me sort of on track, going, okay, am I still telling that particular story? But it is good to make people wonder a little, what is this drawing about? We don't want to be too literal and give them all the information. Sometimes a drawing can be very literal, and the idea of the drawing can be about the technique or the skill in drawing it or the composition and layout. The story could be something else. But if you're actually trying to tell a story through the objects, through the concept, adding a little bit of something you're not quite sure about in there is often a useful way to get that done. So we now have, from a technique point of view, you have the ability to mix and match drawing techniques. And this is where I think it's almost useful to write this down in your sketchbook to remind yourself, because what will happen is you'll end up with some go-tos. You're like, oh, I'm really comfortable doing this thing with just line work and and doing some blending. I'm not going to worry about the other stuff, but I really want you to try practicing all of them. If you're not all that great at using the beveled ends, or you're not that great at the academic drawing and really getting some control over your pencil, this is the time. When you're doing these small sketches that take an hour or so, this is the time to practice, to really get these under control. Because what you actually want, the goal for all of this, is for you to feel that regardless of what it is you're looking at, you've got an idea of how you can approach it. You have a bevy of pencils available, and you're in control of them rather than the pencils being in control of you. And I know that in particular, when it comes to things like, regulating pencil pressure, that's something that requires practice. It doesn't happen just in these classes. It is something that you need to do all the time. Likewise, getting used to using the beveled ends of the pencils. I've fallen in love with that this summer, as you can tell. But I have to start, and get my angle right on a piece of paper over on the side, because I haven't quite yet got that. I can't go directly to my main drawing and get that bevel doing the wash just right yet. I still need to practice that. I love the academic approach of, doing these little, either hatching one way or hatching another, doing very tight little circles or tight hatching to kind of create this feeling of modulation. And now I'm trying to work that in along with, other techniques as I draw something that takes longer. So in an hour, what you end up with is relatively rough. You really haven't had time to modulate, to do a bunch of erasing, to take away lines that don't really belong there. But if you do your own setup and you can come back to it, 15 minutes a day over the course of a week, that gives you a couple of hours of drawing. That gives you some time, without me, chattering away, that gives you some time to actually think about how you're applying things. How are you going to do the rust on the key? How are you going to do the pages? What's going on with that string? Do you have to show all of the twists of the string or only some of them? And it gives you some time to sort of sit back and think it all through. So I hope that, this is giving you a good start on how to actually, combine these techniques together. What we're going to do, in fact, let me stop sharing the screen for the minute and just, let's see. Okay. So what we're going to do for the last few classes, it's going to continue to pull in what we already know how to do, just like we're going to do this landscape drawing next week. But I want now to be able to talk a little bit more about the subject matter as well as the technique, because we understand how the technique ought to work. It's just a matter of, if we want it to be better and look more skillful, of doing it more often. But now it's time for me to start adding in some information about, for example, landscape, just how do we interpret it in a useful way? What tools that we have at our disposal can we use? Every one of you is going to end up with drawings that are different from each other, and that is perfectly fine. It's actually what we want. The next classes after that will be taking on some other subjects that we haven't broached yet. One which you find around your home, I think, if you just sort of regular objects, and one that's kind of a mysterious scene that you probably haven't seen before, and then one mystery one mystery class, which will be we'll do the landscape, then there'll be sort of the mystery class, and then we'll end up with a couple that are a little bit more tangible. But the idea with all of these is that now we're starting to broach into larger subject matter, bigger ideas, not just worrying about technique, because we have the technique down, and seeing what we can do with them. Okay, everybody, thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you back here next week.